Good morning, everyone. For today's topic, we will tackle about the modernism and experimentation. This is the continuation of the report of Miss Diana Sid, and for today's topic, we are going to discuss about Mr. Wallace Stevens, William Carlos Williams, Edward Estlin Cummings, Langston Hughes. So let's start. First, we'll define what is modernism. So, during these days, modernism is the large cultural wave which gradually emerged in Europe and the United States in the early years of the 20th century. So that would be from 1914 to 1945. It is expressed a sense of modern life through art as a sharp break from the past, as well as from Western civilization's classical traditions. And the modern life seems radically different from traditional life. It is more scientific, faster, more technological, and more mechanized. These changes was embraced by modernism. So, It is characterized by modernism was characterized by the rejection of the traditional forms of writing in favor of both experimentation in both poetry and prose. So with the onset of modernism, works of fiction no longer ended in a conventional way where the hero wins the day, the world is safe, and the audience has closure. Instead, the audience is introduced to a new kind of hero, one that carries with him the disillusionment and fragmentation that characterize the modernist era. So, the authors during this time period utilize some new techniques in writing. For example, they abandoned the traditional stages of the novel and wrote in a more fragmentive manner. So this author often used short, choppy sentences to relate the tone of their characters. Poets often wrote in incomplete sentences, using only a few words to create a brief and direct image. So there is also another technique that authors use during this time period was to it is to stream of consciousness. So the stream of consciousness technique was an unfiltered flow of thought, usually written in first person point of view. So the character often jumps from one thought to another or delivers uninterrupted tangents. This writing style reflected the fragmentive social consciousness that pervaded the time period during the feeling of delusionment following World War One. During the modernist era, the method that the author used in their poetry was the free verse. So it is thus away with traditional rhyme and meter. Instead, the line breaks in poetry are based on the poet's own sense of prosody and feeling toward the subject. So, again, the three techniques that the author used during the modernist era was the fragmentation, the stream of consciousness, and the free verse. We have here Mr. Wallace Stevens in the year 1879 to 1955. He was born in Pennsylvania and he was educated at Harvard College and New York University Law School. He practiced law in New York City from 1904 to 1916. It is the time where artistic and poetic activity in New York City was held. So on moving to Harvard, Connecticut to become an insurance executive in 1916, he continued writing poetry. So his life is remarkable for its compartmentalization. So even his associates in the insurance company did not know that he was a major poet. So in private, he continued to develop extremely complex ideas of aesthetic order throughout his life in amply named books such as Harmonium. It is the large Enlarged edition 1931, Ideas of Order in 1935, and Parts of a World in 1942. Some of his best known poems are Sunday Morning, Peter Quince at the Clavier, The Emperor of Ice Cream, 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird, and The Idea of Order at Key West. So Mr. Stevens' poetry dwells upon themes of the imagination, the necessity of aesthetic form, and the belief that the order of art corresponds with an order in nature. His vocabulary is rich and various. He paints lush tropical scenes, but also manages dry, humorous, and ironic vignettes. Some of Stevens' poems drew upon popular culture, while others poke fun at sophisticated of society or soar into an intellectual heaven. He is known for his exuberant word play. Soon, with a noise like tambourines, came her attendant Byzantines. Stevens' work is full of surprising insights. Sometimes he plays tricks on the reader, as in Delusion of 10 o'clock, 1931. So, even Stevens was also the target of frequent criticism for both the ordinary subjects for his early poetry and for the abstractness of his later work. Those who celebrate Stevens' work often point to the dichotomy between the world of commerce and the world of the mind as evidence of Stewart's particularly American upbringing. Unlike many of his generation, Stevens did not shy from commerce or industry in pursuit of his art. Instead, he embraced both halves and himself by working during the day as a lawyer, an insurance company executive, and by writing poetry in the evenings and on vacation. So we have here the example, the delusion of 10 o'clock. One of the great poem that Mr. Stevens wrote was the is the Emperor of Ice Cream. So we're going to read the Emperor of Ice Cream. So the Emperor of Ice Cream, called the ruler of big cigars, the muscular one, and bid him whip. In kitchen cups, conceptions cards, with the wenches dwindle in such dress as they are used to wear, and let the boys bring flowers in the last month's newspapers. Let be finale of Sim, the only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. Take from the dresser of deal, lacking the three glass knobs, the sheets on which she embroidered fantails once, and spread it so as to cover her face. If her horny feet protrude, they come to show how cold she is, and dumbed. Let the lamp affix its beam. The only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. So, in this poet, Mr. Wallace Stevens uses just 16 lines to connect the reader to an ordinary funeral, one in which there are no grand flourishes or flagrant displays, but only mourners in everyday clothes, bouquets of flowers wrapped in newspaper, and a widow who covers her face with a dresser cloth. Just opposed against a poet like Whitman, who celebrates the body, here in this poem, we never even see the deceased in repose. Nonetheless, we know that he is an ordinary man. So by 1923, Stephen warns us that the only emperor, the only one to deserve or receive a grand funeral, is the emperor of ice cream. So the next one is Mr. William Carlos Williams. In the year of 1883 to 1963, Williams was a practicing pediatrician throughout his life. He delivered over 2,000 babies and wrote poems on his prescription pads. William was a classmate of poets Ezra Pound and Hilda de Little, and his early poetry reveals the influence of Imagism. So, Mr. Williams wrote his poems on his prescription pads. So, did you see the one that the doctors gave us about it includes the medicine that we need to bought or to buy. So that's the pad that Mr. Williams wrote his poems. He later went on to champion the use of colloquial speech. His ear for the natural rhythms of American English helped free American poetry from the iambic meter that had dominated English verse since the Renaissance. So his sympathy for ordinary working people, children, and everyday events in modern urban settings make his poetry attractive and accessible. So, example, the red wheelbarrow in 1923, like a Dutch still life, find interest in beauty in everyday objects. Mr. Williams was known for the good doctor. So, he published dozens of works of literature in his lifetime, including novels, plays, essay, and poetry collections, and autobiography, and one of the longest modernist poems ever composed, the five-part epic Patterson. So, he was born in Rutherford, New Jersey in 1883. So also William attended medical school at the University of Pennsylvania where he met fellow poets Hilda Doolittle and Esther Pound. Soon after graduating, William settled back home in Rutherford with his wife and family to run a medical practice, delivering over 2,000 babies during his lifelong career as a pediatrician. While establishing himself as a successful neighborhood doctor, Williams also established himself as an influential voice in New York City modernist art scene, befriending writers such as Wallace Stevens and Marion Moore and experimental painters such as Marcel Duchamp. In 1913, the International Exhibition of Modern Art at New York City 69th Regiment Armory introduced American to radical new style of painting such as Cubism and Fauvism. So inspired by these new forms of visual art, so William sought to craft a similarly new form of poetry for modern America, like the modern painters. So William focuses on the details of urban life through shifting perspectives and juxtaposed image to both free his poetry from the restrictions of traditional verse forms and save it from the anarchy of free verse. William devised a new poetic rhythm called the variable foot that he used to structure his poems organically according to the rhythms of everyday American speech. So, um, Mr. Williams cultivated a relaxed, natural poetry. So, in his hands, the poem was not to become a perfect object of art, as in Stevens or the carefully recreated Wordsworthian incident as in Frost or Stephen Frost. Instead, the poem was to capture an instant of time like an unposed snapshot, a concept he derived from photographers and artists he met at galleries like Steve Litz in New York City. So, like photographs, his poems often hint at hidden possibilities of or attractions, as in The Young Housewife in 1917. He termed his work objectivist to suggest the importance of concrete visual objects. His work often captured the spontaneous emotive pattern of experience and influenced the beat writing in the early 90s, 50s. We have here the some of the poems of Mr. William Carlos Williams. So we have The Red Wheelbarrow and The Young Housewife. So first we're gonna read the Red Wheelbarrow. So The Red Wheelbarrow by William Carlos Williams. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rain water beside the white chickens. So in this poem, The Red Wheelbarrow, Mr. Williams write this that there are no ideas but in things. So what ideas do you find in the red wheelbarrow. So can you um can you see or can you get the idea that Mr. Williams wanted to see, to that he Mr. William wanted to tell us the ideas. So he said that no, there is no ideas but in things. So the things there is the red wheelbarrow. So can you so Mr. Williams here what do you call this one? Literally means that much depends upon a red wheelbarrow and the white chickens. So how what comes in your mind when you hear the wheelbarrow and the chickens? Where did you always find that thing? So we always find that in the farm. So Mr. Williams wanted to um, tell us that its symbols of farming and agriculture is the central of maintaining of life as we know it. As we know it, diba? Wheelbarrow is we use that in getting the materials that we need in the farm, and also the white chickens give us some eggs. So uh, the wheelbarrow can also act as the representation for any and all everyday objects that the speakers believes or Mr. William believes that deserve of appreciation. So that's it. So the next one, the young housewife. So the young housewife. At 10 a.m., the young housewife moves about in neglect behind the wooden walls of her husband's house. I pass solitarily in my car. Then again she comes to the car to call the iceman, fishman, and stand shy, uncorseted, tucking in stray ends of hair, and I compare her to a fallen leaf. The noiseless wheels of my car rush with a cracking sound over, dry the leaves as I bow and pass smiling. So the young housewife, the poem is generalized depiction of the narrator's attraction to sightings of thoughts about and actions toward a young married woman with whom he has limited contact or restricted, perhaps to these transient encounters when he passes her in his car. So the young woman symbolizes the young married woman who is the housewife or stayed in the house. So it means that the woman could have been married as young as the age of 18, I think. So since she stays at home being the housewife, she depends on her husband to take care of her needs. So the poems gives no hope of her being independent, so she will forever depend on someone to support her. So in his young age, this woman married to a man. So that's it. That's the life of a young married housewife or young housewife. So, like Eliot and Pound, Williams tried his hand at the epic form, but while their epics employ literary allusions directed to a small number of highly educated readers, William instead writes for a more general audience. Though he studied abroad, he elected to live in the United States. His epic Patterson, 5 volumes 1946 to 1958, celebrates his hometown of Patterson, New Jersey, as seen by an autobiographical Dr. Patterson. In it, Williams juxtaposed lyric passages, prose, letters, autobiography, newspapers account, and historical facts. So the layout ample white space suggests the open road theme of American literature and gives a sense of new vistas even open to the poor people who picnic in the public park on Sundays. Like Whitman's persona in Leaves of Grass, Dr. Patterson's moves freely among the working people. So our next person is Mr. Edward Aslin Cummings. So in the year of 1894 to 1962, so Mr. Cummings is commonly known as E. E. Cummings. He wrote attractive, innovative verse that distinguish for its humor, grace, celebration of love, and eroticism, and also experimentation with punctuation and visual format on the page. And also, he is a painter that he was the first American poet to recognize that poetry had become primarily a visual, not an oral. So his poem used much unusual spacing and indentation, as well as dropping all use of capital letters. So Mr. Edward was recognized as the first American poet that became primarily a visual but not an oral. So he is commonly known as Mr. E. E. Cummings, and he wrote attractive, innovative, that distinguish from its humor, grace, and celebration of love. So that's like Williams, Mr. Cummings also used colloquial language, sharp imagery, and words from popular culture. Like Williams, he took creative liberties with layout, so his poem In Just in 1920 invites the reader to fill in the missing ideas. So here is the example of poem of Mr. Cummings titled In Just. So, spring when the world is mad, lushes the little lame balloon man. Whistles far and wee, and Edie and Bill come running from marbles and Pharisees, and it's spring. So that is the example of one of Mr. Cummings' poem that invites the reader to fill the missing ideas. So Mr. Cummings rather also used colloquial languages and sharp imagery. So and also his words is from popular culture. So that's our third rather person. So the last one is Mr. Langston Hughes in the year of 1902 to 1967. So one of many talented poets of the Harlem Renaissance of the 1920s, in the company of James Weldon Johnson, Claude Mackay, County Cullen, and others, was Langston Hughes. He embraced African American jazz rhythms and was one of the first black writers to attempt to make a profitable career out of his writing. So Hughes incorporated blues, spiritual, and colloquial speech, and also folkways in his poetry. So Mr. Hughes was one of the first black writers that attempt to make a profitable career out of his writing. So Mr. Hughes is one of the role model or the model of the black American, African American that attempt to make his career in writing to become profitable. So next. And also, Mr. Hughes is an influential cultural organizer. Hughes published numerous black anthologies and began black theater groups in Los Angeles and Chicago, as well as New York City. He also wrote effective journalism, creating the character Jesse B. Semple to express social commentary. One of his most beloved poems, The Negro Speaks of Rivers, the year of 1921 to 1925, that embraces his African and universal heritage in the grand epic catalog. The poem suggests that, like the great rivers of the world, African culture will endure and deepen. So, here is the example, or here is the poem The Negro Speaks of River that Mr. Hanges wrote to become that to become the mirror that, just like great rivers of the world, African culture also is deepen and endure. So we have here the poem of Mr. Langston Hughes titled The Negro Speaks of River. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in the human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. I look upon the Nile and raise the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. Mr. Hanges wrote The Negro Speaks of Rivers in order to celebrate the strength of black heritage and perseverance. So, his speakers go through the poem informing the reader that he or she has seen the world along the banks of famous historical important rivers. So, this poem highlights the blackness, perseverance, and cultural identity. So, also, the Negro Speaks of Rivers stretches from the earliest moments of human civilization all the way to American slavery. It emphasizing that black people have both witnessed and participated in the key moments of human history. So, also, the message of um, the the Negro Speaks of Rivers is that it deals with the extremely general description of the history of African American or black from the pre 1922 era until 1922. So Han just lets the reader know about the historic experiences of blacks to show us the impact that blacks have had in the past eras. So these four people has a great contribution to the English American literature that through literary they express their opinion, their freedom, and also they can compare their culture and they can write what they want to relay to the people and wanted to message to the other. So that's all our report for today. I hope you learned something about our report, and I'm glad that we already done our report. So these four people has a great contribution to the English American literature that through literary they express their opinion, their freedom, and also they can compare their culture and they can write what they want to relay to the people and wanted to message to the other. So that's all our report for today. I hope you learned something about our report, and I'm glad that we already done our reporting, and also thank you for your time and for listening to my report. Again, thank you so much. That's all. Thank you.